Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Aliyah Rumini Larasati, with my ID number is 4192111004. In this video, I will continue the discussion from the previous video. I will explain what I know in the chapter 9, namely about Euclid's concept development. The first one, I will explain the Euclidean tradition. The first one is antiquity and the Middle Ages. Euclid's elements in 13th book were probably written in the 3rd century BC, drawing together materials from a more ancient mathematical tradition, and truly underwent several changes and modifications already during the Hellenistic age. Several countries later, the mathematician Theton of Alexandria prepared an edition of the elements, which has had a great importance in the following tradition of the text. The oldest extant copies of the elements are, however, Byzantine manuscripts dating back to the beginning of the 9th century. Later Greek manuscripts were in circulation among scholars during the Renaissance, and in fact provide the Greek text for the first edition of Euclid in the modern world. One further important manuscript was discovered only at the beginning of the 9th century by Franciscus Sperard, and it apparently contained a version of the elements older than any other, and possibly predating Theton's editing of Euclid. At least, it seems that this author had access to both Thetonian and non-Thetonian manuscripts. It is still considered the best guess which we suppose regarding the original from the Euclid work, and has been employed by the Danish philologist Johann Ludwig Heiberg to prepare the only critical edition of the elements that we currently have. For a study of the Greek text of the elements, see for instance Romevieux et al. In 2001. Some principles among the 14 or 15 contained in the oldest manuscript, however, come to be considered superfluous already in the late antiquity, and Portulus informs us that a number of them were in fact later interpolation. Modern philology inclines to accept Portulus' opinion and attempt to prove that some of the principles must have been added in the ancient transmission of the text, largely but not unanimously endorsed opinion among scholars. Among scholars is that Euclid originally had only 10 principles, 5 postulates and 5 combinations, while the other axioms are Hellenistic edition. The second one is the Renaissance. Components edition and its axiomatic system were used several times in the following century. Luca Pacioli produced an import version of it, and Nicole Tartaglia translated into Italian Tartaglia's edition inaugurated the translation of Euclid into modern language, and was followed by Alexander's translation into German, Forchadell's into French, Billingsley's into English, Jamoran's into Spanish, and Dawes into Dutch. In the meantime, Greek manuscripts had begun to arrive in Europe, and Bartolomeo Gamberti had translated the elements into Latin directly from the Greek, thus opening a new era in the beginning philosophical repression of the text. In 1533, Simon Grinaeus published the edition principle. In 1533, Simon Grinaeus published the edition principle of the Greek text. The later edition produced on the basis of the Greek text once again proposed the Asian system to principle which further no arithmetical axiom nor any of the further correction made by Compano. Grenius' edition, however, was based on a Greek manuscript that changed the division between postulate and axioms, and only admit three postulates, listing the other among the axioms. Grenius, in fact, even appended an edition of Portula's commentary to Euclid's text, so that the system of principles contained in the edition principle of the elements was in fact Neoplatonic philosophical construction. In any case, Grenius' edition of the Greek text remained the only one available for a very long time, and most of the philological edition of the Euclid in Latin or in modern languages, which were prepared in the following two centuries, simply followed Grenius' third system of axiom and postulate. Okay, the next one is the 17th century. The 17th century was the most creative age in the invention and development of new principles for geometry and arithmetic, and in many respects, the highest point of research into the foundation of mathematics in the early modern age. Following an age in which the main goal seemed to be that of the restitution of an equator text of the ancient mathematical work, after the corruption of the Middle Ages, the new century decidedly aimed at the reform and improvement of the elements beyond what Euclid himself had been able to do. To this effect, several completely new systems of axioms were devised in order to ground elementary mathematics. And then the 18th century. In the 18th century, the foundational discussion on mathematics shifted for the most part outside the scope of the elements. Most efforts were now dedicated to the many issues raised by the new calculus, and reflection on the foundation of mathematics was often aimed rather at justifying the development of infinity or infinitesimal quantities. These discussions, however, are seldom to be found in the edition of Euclid. Even elementary mathematics is from time to time grounded on different principles and algebra over the possibility a dissimilar foundation approach, grounded in symbolic manipulation rather than simple geometrical construction. Okay, the next I will explain about axiom and postulate. The first one is about ancient principles, or group 1 and 2. The Euclidean list of the five postulates and fifth combination follows Heiberg's edition and finds its main foundation and justification in a number of comments made by ancient scholars, who had in their hands edition of the elements with the lengthier system of principles but claimed that some of them had been added in the centuries following Euclid. The second one is the theory of magnitudes, group 3 and group 4. These principles were often looked upon as a main axiom of the materials universalis. That is to say, a mathematical theory which is period to encompass about geometry and arithmetic. Many of them were later to be upheld in the theory of proposition, which has also been codified by some others as a form of universal mathematics. A number of them are especially connected with the arithmetical axiom and may in fact but conflict. The reason is that numbers themselves were often confined of as collection of unities. The next one is about the theory of proposition and the axiom of Archimedes, group 5 and 6. The theory of proposition to be found in the book 5 of the Elements is probably that part of elementary mathematics which has undergone, in the history of the Euclidean corpus, the greatest amount of modification. It was entirely based on a complex system of divination, possibly confined by Eduxius, which suffered serious textual corruption during the Middle Ages and which affected all the medieval Latin translation depending on either route. And then the next one is principle on space and situation or group A. Many of them come from Francisco's Federici della Novo Geometric and Pascal introduction. The importance of these two words contained in their claim that geometry should be regarded as the science of space, a consensus which represents a rather new epistemological position in the 16th and 17th centuries. Since the days of Euclid'S and Aristotle throughout antiquity and for a long time afterward, the science of geometry had tended to identify its proper and specific object rather as the notion of magnitude or continuous quantity. As a consequence, spatial notions tend not to be represented in the classical mathematics. Words are not employed in the elements. This situation persisted on into the Middle Ages and indeed even on into the Renaissance and the early modern age. The axiom of group 2 until 6 bear witness in fact to the premise of the notion of magnitude over any other general concept. The next one is about principle of indication and continuity. Group 9 until group 10. Dimensional considerations are not the less centered in the axiom of insight. These latter deal with the intersection of previous geometrical features. The axioms in this category are among the most interesting of our survey and have survived in modern and more intent from into modern axiomatization. While the origin of the number of this axiom is to be found in the Greek commentaries, many more were added by Clavius and by Borelli, who introduced several axioms which were later to be employed by many other editions. We may note that Clavius' axiom is from time to time is also spelled as to strike lines which coincide in a segment will coincide in their entity. Which is, however, an equivalent formulation of the former. The last one is the parallel postulate in the group 13. The last group of principles lists a few alternatives to the parallel postulate which were confided to replace the infamous Euclidean principle. It should be noted that the list is far from complete, so many attempts to demonstrate the Euclidean postulate were undertaken by making use of different definitions of parallel lines. The most famous of which is that two straight lines are parallel if they are equidistant. Moreover, several other attempts to prove P5 are contained in monographic essay, such as Wallis de Postulat Quinto, Saseri Euclid's Vindicatus, or Lambret Theorio der Parallelineen. Such works are not included in our list of the edition of the elements and often offer still more and different statements equivalent to P5. Okay, I think that's all I can explain in this video in chapter 9 about Euclid concept development. If I have something mistake, please apologize me. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Goodbye.